My name is Pamela Graham. For those of you who don't know me, I work here at Columbia Libraries as the Director of Global Studies and the Director of the Center for Human Rights Documentation and Research. And it's really a great pleasure to be moderating this next panel. I had the good fortune of working under Jim's leadership for most of my career, and it's really an honor to have the chance to participate in this symposium. So in this panel, we're going to follow a slightly different format where we'll have more of a discussion amongst the panelists around a set of questions that they've looked at and considered. And this panel lets us really delve into issues we've heard about already this morning, and issues where Jim, throughout his career, very creatively and provocatively challenged to think about issues of the profession, career development, recruitment, and preparation for working in the libraries. So I'm going to go ahead and ask each panelist, and I'm going to take a seat here, but I'm going to ask each panelist to say a few words of introduction, and then we'll launch into our questions. So Anne, if I could ask you to start with the introductions.
So I'm Ann Kenney. I'm the Farrell University Librarian at Cornell University. It's been a distinct pleasure for me over the last 5 or 6 years to work very closely with Jim and my wonderful colleagues here at Columbia. I've been at Cornell since 1987 and University Librarian since 2008.
Hi, I'm Krista Williford. I'm the Director of Research and Assessment at the Council on Library and Information Resources. The reason that I'm here on this panel is because I have been working, for the past 10 years with CLEAR on its postdoctoral fellowship program, which many of you may have heard of before, and so that's the perspective I bring to this panel today. I was a fellow between 2004 and 2006, so the very first 2 years, and I suppose I'm formerly feral and now domesticated because I subsequently got my MLIS from the University of Washington in 2008.
Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Mark A. Puente. I'm the Director of Diversity and Leadership Programs at the Association of Research Libraries in Washington, D.C. I've been at ARL just a little over 6 years, and I believe the reason that I've been called upon this panel is, probably for numerous reasons, but one of which is I do manage 4 diversity recruitment programs that basically funds Master of Library and Information Science Studies for people from traditionally underrepresented racial and ethnic minority groups, and then also for the work that we do on the leadership side as well. And I'm not eating candy. I am as well. I'm a little under the weather, so please excuse the occasional little click there.
Great. Thank you all. And this is really a really great group of people to address the questions in front of us. So I wanted to begin with a very broad question that can help lay the groundwork for the discussion. And that is to look at the general question of what is the changing nature of the workforce in academic libraries. Can you sketch out a bit for us how you see this from the different perspectives out of which you're all working? And Anne, I'm going to ask you to lead us off on that.
Okay, great. So the panel, whatever happened to the library degree requirement, I'm not sure really that's the question before us, but rather what constitutes librarianship today. Research libraries, I'm most familiar with them, are really medium-sized corporations and operating budgets in the tens and, I learned, hundreds of millions of dollars. Just as a business doesn't just hire a sales force, so too a research library relies on a myriad of skills and expertise. One thing I do believe about the future of the librarian is that the day of the generalist has passed. We've witnessed the rise of the functional specialist, those with particular expertise in technology, instructional design, business planning, and the like, with wonderful new titles. Whoever is a digital evangelist out there, I'm jealous. These experts come with specialized training and skill sets that are different from those who entered our profession a generation ago. We also see, I think, a resurgence in the disciplinary expert as distinctions in science and social science, the arts, and the humanities are key to engaging faculty and students. But despite this move, there is some resilience to the MLS or the MLIS. 84% of all professional staff at ARL institutions were card-carrying MLS a decade ago, and it's only down 2% 10 years later. I know Mark will present some more data about the positions postings recently. There is a divide between a rising professional staff and librarians, and part of that divide centers on the distinctions between who are academics and who are professionals. At Cornell, we have two big buckets for academics in our professional library, two job families, either a librarian or you're an archivist. There are a few anomalies. We have two research associates who came in with those appointments, and two visiting scholars, Terry Bellinger, who at Columbia founded Rare Book School, and African Bambaataa, who is a founding hip-hop pioneer who has no BA. Our makeup at Cornell, 31% are academic, 22% are professional, and 47% are support staff. Almost all the librarians have MLSs, less so for the archivists, but we're just beginning to move away from requiring the MLS for some of the library posts. I see a future where our professional staff at Cornell is 1/3 functional experts, 1/3 disciplinary experts, and 1/3 librarians, someone who brings information management library skills to the table. One final point of interest, we're seeing a shift among the professional staff at Cornell towards librarian posts, primarily, I think, because of the academic status these posts convey. I'm of two minds about this. Are we trying to make other experts shoehorn into too few buckets or job families? So why should a lawyer have to be a librarian to have an academic status? Or are we seeing a redefinition of what it means to be a librarian, which has less and less to do with the credentials that you bring to the table and more to do with perhaps the resilience of what librarianship is all about? I can't quite decide which side of the fence I'm on in that one.
Right. Krista.
All right. The postdoctoral fellowship program has been bringing recent PhDs into libraries since 2004, and we've a total of 116 recent PhDs brought into libraries over that time to 53 different host institutions. So I really have this kind of narrow focus, and broad at the same time, on this specific program and on this specific experience of the subject expert, most without the library degree coming into to the library environment to work for 1 to 2 years, mostly 2 years. Here's 3 general trends that I've observed in the evolution of roles and responsibilities of our fellows over the history of the program, and these are interrelated. The diversification of subject domain expertise in the library. In 2004, the participants in our program, there were 11 of us, and I think maybe 9 of us were literature scholars and 2 were historians, and we had 1 information scientist as well. That we were very, very humanities focused. In 2009, we incorporated our first social scientists, and 2010, our first scientists, and in 2012, with the support of the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation and subsequently the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, we created fellowships for data curation in the social sciences, and specific areas of the humanities. So we've really seen a kind of fluorescence of different sorts of expertise being demanded by our library hosts. We've also seen the use of the subject's expertise in the library become more integral to library core services, I think. Back when I was a fellow, there was the typical experience was the fellow would be, we're up in special collections or, kept sort of at arm's length, doing research that would inform library strategic decisions that might be made later, or working on specific projects, sort of contained. But now we have fellows who work on teams delivering services working directly with students and faculty. We've seen a change in the focus of our fellowships from more teaching-oriented to both teaching and research, working hand in hand. And this comes, of course, with the new emphasis on data curation since 2012. But we also have seen our self-funded fellowships be a lot more data curation-oriented and digital humanities focused. I would say about 3/4 of our current cohort of fellows either have a digital humanities or data curation inflection in their role. So those are the three trends that I've observed.
Mark, if you like, I can pull up some
Sure.
slides you have. Great.
So my slides are not nearly as sexy as Greg's, but I have just a few. I won't bore you if I can figure out how to advance this. Okay, sorry about that. There we go. So a few trends. First of all, our organizations are hiring again. This is based on, I'm getting quite a bit of feedback here, based on a very quick a very quick scan of position description postings on the ARL position, we call it the Jobs, Internships, and Residencies database. And as you can see, not surprisingly, we looked at a small sample, I believe just over 6% of those postings over the last 5 years. The good news is that we are on a positive trend, which I think is great. If you look at the requirement of the MLIS, I'm not going to contradict Anne because I believe she's completely right. The sort of meta question here isn't the state of the MLIS. I think there are implications for our workforce in terms of how we create cultures that are going to be inviting and allow people that maybe do not have that specific credential and allow them to thrive and to collaborate with our colleagues that do. But again, before you call my mother and start complaining about the lack of rigor in this research project, this is just a small snapshot. I mean, obviously we're looking at just over about 140, I believe, institutions, so just beyond the 125 research libraries and archives that are members of ARL. Again, that is a tiny sample of the well over 4,000 academic libraries in the United States. However, this is what this looks like. For the MLIS required, the green bar that you have there, we hand-coded about, I believe it was just under 200 position descriptions, and this is what this looks like, or has looked like over the past 5 years. I think it's very interesting. The green bar, specifically the language that we coded as MLIS required, was only specifically MLIS required or equivalent foreign degree. So very narrow in scope in terms of what we coded that way. As you can see, MLIS are equivalent experience, so another advanced degree, something to that effect, and a few years of relevant professional experience. That is in the red bar. And it is very interesting to look at, from 2010 to 2014, the rise in positions that have no mention, no formal LIS training being required, 14.5% in 2004. In our small sample, we didn't find any in 2010. So what do they look like? Well, let's see. Let's go back to no LIS degree requirements. These are some of the interesting titles, maybe many higher level administrative types of positions, human resources manager, lots of the digital work that we're doing, and things like marketing associates, things like that. I found that to be very interesting, and if I can go back. I also went just a step further as we talk about bringing people on into our organizations that have high domain expertise, deep subject expertise. Which of our positions required a PhD, either required or preferred? And these are some of the titles that came out of that brief analysis of those position descriptions. So I think you'll find it interesting. The other sort of framing of this is that none of this reflects, of course, who actually moved into those positions and the credentials that they had. I mean, on one side of it, I happen I'm a recovered music librarian, and so I know that community and that movement very well. The head of the music library, PhD preferred, the person who moved into that position did not have a PhD. So I think it's really interesting. I would be, I'm sort of very energized by this, and I want to take a deeper dive into more of those trends past this, and I would be happy to share those data with you all. Turn that off?
Yep, that's right. Great, we'll shuffle back into position here. So we're hearing that there are these different trends and people with different backgrounds that are occupying the library. So, our next question is to ask you, how do you envision creating the right environment so people of these different backgrounds can commingle? And I'm also thinking about what Carol mentioned earlier this morning about creating the right kinds of environments for creative and promising ideas. So how would you envision the steps we should take to create the right environments so that people with diverse backgrounds can form this workforce? And Krista, I'm going to have you start off this round.
Sure, happy to do that. I'll just say 4 things that about what makes our fellowships successful. We've had 116 fellowships, as I've said. Not all of them have been successful, but the ones that have been successful, I think all these things are true. There's regular, structured contact with supervisors and closest colleagues. We have what we call a boot camp experience, a common experience that kicks off the fellowship program. And for the last several years, we've brought the supervisors into that experience and stressed the importance of working with the fellows regularly on a day-to-day basis and the sort of special concerns that fellows might have about subsequent career development, that kind of thing. And there are all these great intentions, but there isn't always this follow-through. And we have seen fellowships sort of fall apart without this regular structured contact. Clear definition of roles without being inflexible. That's a really important balance to strike for our fellows. One of our supervisors said something really interesting in a recent report about her fellow. She was talking about how well the fellow could operate in ambiguity even while embracing a delivery-oriented mindset. That's the kind of flexibility you need for a person to, like that, to grow and be productive in this kind of role. Support for professional development is the third thing, and we've seen a great divide between institutions that provide a lot of support for our fellows to go to conferences, to pursue independent research, to get academic credit for some of the work that they're doing, and other institutions that feel like that's not really what we in the library do, and there's definitely a difference in satisfaction for our fellows, and I think for all academic librarians, this is also true. Better for professional development makes a more satisfied and productive librarian. And finally, and this is sort of the personal characteristics of the fellows that we find to be more successful, those are the fellows with a broad intellectual curiosity and appreciation for the expertise of others. Now, and we talk about the shortcomings of the MLIS degree to produce great librarians. I think you can point those same fingers at our PhD programs. So our fellows who come into the library have been very, very strictly focused on their area of expertise, and it's an adjustment for them to take a step back and embrace a broader view and be able to transition comfortably between the role of leader in one context and the role of learner in another, and that kind of person is the kind of person we strive to attract to the fellowship, and that kind of person, I think, is more successful in libraries in general.
Right. Mark or Anne, your thoughts?
That sums it up pretty well. I was thinking, ensuring full integration into the research, teaching, learning missions of that organization if you're at academic institution. Specifics I won't provide, but at a very high level. The other thing that I would think, and again in terms of tracking entree via residencies and fellowships and this sort of thing, and a lot of our member institutions are doing this, and I think it's a great service to the profession, but really ensuring that, if I may use the term legacy staff, so those people who have been around a little bit, are well informed about what is happening, well informed about these trends, well informed about what the implications might be, about how those people with a diverse set of experiences and what have you can collaborate effectively together. So I think that's another critical point there. And then also providing, as Krista said, providing those professional development experiences, and also encouraging people that to be part of the conversation, to contribute to professional organizations, to contribute to the publication record, to the scholarly record within our context. So.
I think we've seen this issue of difficulties with cohabitation in other contexts within libraries. Think about the baby boomers having to cohabit with the millennials is one thing. The professional staff versus the non-professional staff, that divide. And I think one of the things that's the real difficulty is this position of turf and defining your pack. Who's in and who's out. Jim talks about being raised by wolves, but I think we also see folks raised by coyotes and mountain lions and many other kinds of predators out there. From my perspective, I think the key really is in interdependency. I've been thinking a lot about the liaison functions in libraries lately, and we know the portfolios for liaisons have continued to expand to meet new needs and expectations, and it's clear that no one liaison can do it all. Increasingly, liaisons, typically falling, I think, into the camp of the domain specialists, are reliant on functional experts to provide much needed expertise in addressing the strange and wonderful landscape of research, teaching, and learning. These pairings provide for a stronger outreach, but they do raise turf issues. Should subject expertise trump functional skill sets in reaching out to faculty and students? There's a mutual dependence between domain liaisons and functional specialists, but developing a mutual model for working across functional areas is a challenge. Interdependence has yet to lead to an appreciation that liaison work is important, but individual labels less so. Assigning a liaison responsibility to teams instead of individuals might be a good first step. One final point about this is that the university is becoming increasingly porous. We see academic-related functions coming in and going out of libraries, centers for teaching excellence, digital humanities centers, and the like. Sometimes they come in and sometimes they go out, and that ability to work across those divides, I think, is also key.
Great. I want to soon move into questions, and I hope, and since there may be a lot of good questions to ask, but I just had one last question to pose to our group here, and it's already been alluded to a few times, but I think the question of mentorship programs, leadership programs, fellowships, obviously has become, these have become more prominent, and wanted you to think a little bit about and tell us how you see those fitting into training, either to replace traditional degrees, or complement, or in some cases replace traditional degrees. What do you think we're getting from those that we can't get in any other way? From those kinds of mentorship, leadership programs. Mark, would you care to start us off?
Sure. I think it's an interesting question, particularly within, again, the ARL context and this transitioning that we're going through to a new strategic framework. Carol referenced that earlier, and there's a particular initiative, an area called the ARL Academy, that really might play an important role in this type of training. But certainly as we look at our own efforts in leadership development, also in mentoring and that sort of thing, there is lots of evidence that this will support these transitions and this transition of the workforce, providing opportunities mostly for those who go through these programs, especially in a cohort sort of environment, to connect with colleagues in ways that they really don't have opportunities in other contexts. So I think that's really vital to the work going forward. I also think that mentoring and coaching, and those are two really distinct roles. But looking at opportunities for coaching and for mentoring, I think is exciting, and particularly with respect to affecting culture and training people about both existing and aspirational cultures for our organizations. There's lots of opportunity there, and when we look to our colleagues who are perhaps more experienced and who have a broader sense of this, they can impart a lot of knowledge and really help with those full integrations into the workforce.
So I'll just say a couple of things because my colleagues here are more better suited to respond to this question. But two things. First, I do think that we need a greater emphasis placed on post-appointment training or acculturation or credentialing or whatever we want to call it. I have great hope for new models that are rising, including the ARL Academy that Mark referenced. But as I think about new folks coming into the library at Cornell, there are three things that sort to the top for me as I look at new candidates for the position. Are they collaborative? Are they risk tolerant? And are they change ready? It's only after thinking through those things that I start to place any real emphasis on the specific degrees or qualifications that they have. Frankly, I'm a little degree agnostic. It means less to me what cards you carry into the library, but more what kinds of skill sets and mindsets and ability to continue to grow and develop. Second, I'm concerned about how future professionals are being trained before they come into the library. I think libraries and iSchools are doing a good job of imparting theory, but less so in preparing for future professional work in the workforce today. Jim had raised in his paper the notion of an executive MLS. I think it's an intriguing idea, but I'd also like to explore the idea of coupling of library and iSchools with teaching research libraries, much like residency programs for MDs in teaching hospitals. These would have to be, I think, closely aligned to career paths and specializations rather than general time in the trenches. So maybe you're interested in brain surgery or pediatrics or the equivalent within the library today.
Any last comments?
I think that my colleagues have done a great job, so we can move on to questions.
Okay, great. So we're going to, I know we stand between you and lunch, but we are going to just take a few moments to take some questions. And as a reminder, we have microphones on either end of the room that we would ask you to use so that we can hear you.
You've talked a lot about new hires, new people coming in, etc. Let me just set a little bit of a scenario for you. Let's say I'm 45. Don't I wish? Anyway, and I have a library degree, and I basically speak and read English and have a limited knowledge of French. And I have done in my career probably 700 or 800 instruction sessions and answered thousands of reference questions. And have done some faculty liaison work and selected millions of dollars worth of collections. Where do I fit in the future? What's my career path? What do I do now? I mean, I'm asking this question on behalf of a lot of my colleagues because whether we as library administrators like it or not, there are a lot of people in our staff who are in this position. And what do you all recommend that we consider as far as our human resources policies and our training and whatever? Because it's one thing when you're working with somebody who's 29. It's another thing when you're trying to encourage and mentor somebody who's in their mid-career.
Aha.
All of us?
I'll take a quick crack at it and then hand it over quickly. I think you have a wonderful range of skill sets that are being brought to the table. I think in some ways breaking out of sort of traditional thinking about what those skill sets can do and how they can be put to play in greater partnerships with faculty, greater collaborations with students, sort of thinking more outside in rather than inside out. I'm always amazed at how much faculty and students think they know about things, and then how limited that actually is. One of the areas we've been focusing on at Cornell, which I just love, is this notion of how to make academics, and we've been thinking a lot about doctoral students, more effective in their digital research workflows. And how do you put these things together to make it a more effective thing that is appropriate to your discipline? And one of the grad students who just went through the Submersion program talked about, I know that I like to work with manuscripts and photographs, but I also acknowledge now that I'm a digital worker and I need to be effective as a digital worker, and there's no excuse for being unproductive in that environment. So I think there's some things that you can do in those new forms of connections.
I was just going to add that I agree. I think that many of the core principles, maybe if you get really granular, a lot of the work is changing, but the core principles are not changing so much. There's so many things that transfer from one environment, from the analog environment to the digital environment, and you really need to work at fully leveraging that. I look at the University of Kansas, for example, that really took not a functional approach to reorganization. They used the Scallop tool, maybe Columbia has used it, called StrengthsFinder, as a method of inquiry to figure out exactly where people's interests were and what their skills were and where they wanted to be developed. And so they focused a reorganization around that year-long exercise that I think many people at that organization would find would consider highly successful, and many of them transitioned to positions that they had not anticipated. And so it really has been good for the organization.
I'll just say really quickly that CLEAR and EDUCAUSE co-sponsor a program called the Leading Change Institute, and the purpose of that is just for the people such as you described, for building a national network of support for professionals who want to advance sort of from the middle.
Thank you very much. I'm going to have to do something here. We're going to have to break for lunch, and maybe you can ask. From whom?
We have time for a question from
All
you,
right,
Jim.
let me just add, one topic we haven't addressed here in terms of the 21st century workforce is issues of diversity. And I've worked many years with sponsorship and fundraising for ALA's Spectrum initiative to bring more people from underrepresented communities into the profession. And as Mark knows, I've worked very closely with the LCDP program at ARL, serving as a mentor for, I think, 5 individuals in that program over a 20-year period. Data indicates that over the last 20 years, we have not made significant progress in diversifying our field. Do we need to think about new strategies and new approaches to diversifying our staff, whatever of whatever flavor, if you will, and how are we going to do this? How are we going to solve this problem? It is a problem.
If I had the answer to that question, I'd be making a lot more money than I do right now. However, but I think it's legitimate. I do think, again, historically, from ARL's perspective, our strategies have been focused on the MLIS and recruiting people from very diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds into the profession, but we have to cast the net more widely and get more of those fish. I think if we're going to remain relevant, if we're going to have people who can curate collections that perhaps have some sensitivity and that sort of thing in terms of the content, looking at perhaps I don't know, I'm just making this up right now, a program similar to the Clear postdoctoral fellow that has a diversity element to it, or a focus on diversity, that sort of thing. I think it is critical. However, I mean, if we go back to the data, we do have to keep those efforts diversified, because if clearly, if we can generalize at all from those data that I posted earlier, if 56% of our organizations, 56% of those position descriptions still require that MLIS, we still need to keep our hand in that bucket. Absolutely. But in terms of expanding our efforts, absolutely, we need to find the capacity. And when is the fundraising panel? A little bit later? Because we need to find the money also to support those endeavors as well.
And hook them younger. That's what I would say. It's not just the public library's responsibility to excite K-12 students with what the library is and what it can be and what it can bring to their lives.
Right.
Well, one last comment. Recruitment's one thing. It's the retention issue. How do you really focus on communities, the ability to work across things? Great minds think alike, but the flip is fools seldom differ. And being able to tolerate different perspectives at the table and different work habits and priorities, I think, will be key moving forward.
Great. I think with that, we'll adjourn to head to lunch. Please help me thank our panelists.